Book 3, Part 9 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 9, October 22nd to November 10th, 1862. Wednesday, 22nd October, Linwood. We left Clinton this morning, and have just now arrived by the cars. Charlie came in last evening to our great surprise, so we did not scruple to leave Lilly. The Baton Rouge party returned late this evening. In spite of all preparation, Gibbes was horrified at the appearance of home. Friday, October 24th. A letter from Jimmy, the first we have received since New Orleans fell. It was dated the 10th instant, and he spoke of being on the eve of running the blockade, and going to Liverpool to "represent our unfortunate navy," as he says, though I am at a loss to imagine what he can mean. He speaks of a kind friend, a Mr. George Trenholm, whose kindness has been perfectly extraordinary. He has befriended him in every way. Charlie has just come by the railroad, bringing other letters from him to mother and Lilly. In mother's is his last good bye on the 12th. Again Mr. Trenholm is the theme. I could not help crying over my dear little brother's manly, affectionate letter. He says he is sure God will still care for him. He has raised him up friends wherever he has been. He says he lost all his clothing in going to Charleston. There, among other kind people, he met this gentleman, who carried him to his house, where he has kept him ever since, treating him like his son, and forced him to accept a magnificent outfit as a present from him. He procured the appointment which sends Jimmy abroad. I wish Jimmy had been more explicit concerning it. We hardly know what it is, or how long it will keep him. The money he received to pay Jimmy's passage, received from the Government, he in turn obliged Jimmy to accept, as he sails in one of Mr. Trenholm's steamers; and, not satisfied with that, gives him carte blanche on his house in England, to be filled up with any amount he chooses to name. Mother went back to Clinton with Charlie that evening, to my great distress, for she hates that odious place as much as I. I know the life will kill her if it lasts 6 months longer. How happy I would be if it were not for the thought of her uncomfortable position there. Lilly agrees with me that, once out of it, she never wishes to see the vile place again. Margaret says that when the Lord had finished all the world and all the people, He had some scraps left, and just thought He'd batch up Clinton with them. Perhaps she is right. Sunday, 26th October. This place is completely overrun by soldiers passing and repassing. Friday night 5 stayed here, last night 2 more, and another has just gone. One, last night, a bashful Tennessean, had never tasted sugar cane. We were sitting around a blazing fire, enjoying it hugely, when in answer to our repeated invitations to help himself, he confessed he had never eaten it. Once instructed, though, he got on remarkably well, and ate it in a civilized manner, considering it was a first attempt. Everything points to a speedy attack on Port Hudson. Rumors reach us from New Orleans of extensive preparations by land and water, and of the determination to burn Clinton as soon as they reach it, in revenge for the looms that were carried from Baton Rouge there, and which can soon be put in working order to supply our soldiers, negroes, and ourselves with necessary clothing. Of two evils, if Baton Rouge is to be overrun by Yankees and Clinton burned, I would rather await them at home. Sunday, November 2d. Yesterday was a day of novel sensations to me. First came a letter from mother announcing her determination to return home, and telling us to be ready next week. Poor mother! She wrote drearily enough of the hardships we would be obliged to undergo in the dismantled house, and of the new experience that lay before us. But n'importe, I am ready to follow her to Yankee Land, or any other place she chooses to go. It is selfish for me to be so happy here, while she leads such a distasteful life in Clinton. In her postscript, though, she said she would wait a few days longer, to see about the grand battle which is supposed to be impending; so our stay will be indefinitely prolonged. How thankful I am that we will really get back, though! I hardly believe it possible, however. It is too good to be believed. The nightmare of a probable stay in Clinton being removed, I got in what the boys call a perfect gale, and sang all my old songs with a greater relish than I have experienced for many a long month. My heart was open to every one. So forgiving and amiable did I feel that I went downstairs to see Will Carter. I made him so angry last Tuesday that he went home in a fit of sullen rage. It seems that some time ago, some one, he said, told him such a joke on me that he had laughed all night at it. Mortified beyond all expression at the thought of having had my name mentioned between two men, I, who have thus far fancied myself secure from all remarks, good, bad, or indifferent, of men, I refused to have anything to say to him until he should either explain me the joke, or, in case it was not fit to be repeated to me, until he apologized for the insult. He took 2 minutes to make up a lie. This was the joke, he said. Our milkman had said that Sarah Morgan was the proudest girl he ever saw; that she walked the streets as though the earth was not good enough for her. My milkman making his remarks! I confess I was perfectly aghast with surprise, and did not conceal my contempt for the remark, or his authority either. But one can't fight one's milkman. I did not care for what he or any of that class could say. I was surprised to find that they thought at all. But I resented it as an insult as coming from Mr. Carter, until with tears in his eyes fairly, and in all humility, he swore that if it had been anything that could reflect on me in the slightest degree, he would thrash the next man who mentioned my name. I was not uneasy about a milkman's remarks, so I let it pass, after making him acknowledge that he had told me a falsehood concerning the remark which had been made. But I kept my revenge. I had but to cry "Milk!" in his hearing to make him turn crimson with rage. At last he told me that the less I said on the subject, the better it would be for me. I could not agree. Milk, I insisted, was a delightful beverage. I had always been under the impression that we owned a cow, until he had informed me it was a milkman, but was perfectly indifferent to the animal, so I got the milk. With some such allusion, I could make him mad in an instant. Either a guilty conscience or the real joke grated harshly on him, and I possessed the power of making it still worse. Tuesday I pressed it too far. He was furious, and all the family warned me that I was making a dangerous enemy. Yesterday he came back in a good humor, and found me in unimpaired spirits. I had not even talked of curds, though I had given him several hard cuts on other subjects, when an accident happened which frightened all malicious fun out of me. We were about going out after cane, and Miriam had already pulled on one of her buckskin gloves, dubbed "Old Sweetie" from the quantity of cane juice they contain, when Mr. Carter slipped on its mate, and held it tauntingly out to her. She tapped it with a case knife she held, when a stream of blood shot up through the glove. A vein was cut, and was bleeding profusely. He laughed, but panic seized the women. Some brought a basin, some stood around. I ran after cobwebs, while Helen Carter held the vein, and Miriam stood in silent horror, too frightened to move. It was indeed alarming, for no one seemed to know what to do, and the blood flowed rapidly. Presently he turned a dreadful color, and stopped laughing. I brought a chair, while the others thrust him into it. His face grew more deathlike, his mouth trembled, his eyes rolled, his head dropped. I comprehended that these must be the symptoms of fainting, a phenomenon I had never beheld. I rushed after water, and Lydia after cologne. Between us it passed away; but for those few moments I thought it was all over with him, and trembled for Miriam. Presently he laughed again, and said, "Helen, if I die, take all my negroes and money, and prosecute those two girls. Don't let them escape." Then, seeing my long face, he commenced teasing me. "Don't ever pretend you don't care for me again. Here you have been unmerciful to me for months, hurting more than this cut, never sparing me once; and the moment I get scratched, it's 'O Mr. Carter!' and you fly around like wild and wait on me." In vain I represented that I would have done the same for his old lame dog, and that I did not like him a bit better. He would not believe it, but persisted that I was a humbug, and that I liked him in spite of my protestations. As long as he was in danger of bleeding to death, I let him have his way, and, frightened out of teasing, spared him for the rest of the evening. Just at what would have been twilight but for the moonshine, when he went home after the blood was staunched and the hand tightly bound, a carriage drove up to the house, and Colonel Allen was announced. I can't say I was ever more disappointed. I had fancied him tall, handsome, and elegant. I had heard of him as a perfect fascinator, a woman killer. Lo! a wee little man is carried in the arms of two others, wounded in both legs at Baton Rouge, he has never yet been able to stand. He was accompanied by a Mr. Bradford, whose assiduous attentions and boundless admiration for the Colonel struck me as unusual. I had not observed him otherwise, until the General whispered, "Do you know that that is the brother of your old sweetheart?" Though the appellation was by no means merited, I recognized the one he meant. Brother to our Mr. Bradford of 18 months ago. My astonishment was unbounded, and I alluded to it immediately. He said it was so; that his brother had often spoken to him of us, and the pleasant evenings he had spent at home. November 4th, 1862. Oh, what a glorious time we had yesterday! First, there were those two gentlemen to be entertained all day, which was rather a stretch, I confess, so I stole away for a while. Then I got the sweetest letter from Miss Trenholm, enclosing Jimmy's photograph, and she praised him so that I was in a damp state of happiness, and flew around showing my picture to everybody, Mr. Bradford included, who pronounced him a noble boy, and admired him to my satisfaction. Then came a letter from Lilly, saying mother had decided to remain in Clinton, and wanted us to join her there. O my prophetic soul! My heart went below zero. Then Colonel Allen sent to Port Hudson for the band to serenade us, and raised my spirits in anticipation of the treat. While performing my toilet in the evening, Waller Fowler arrived on his way to Vicksburg, bringing a letter to Miriam from Major Drum. Heaven only knows how it got here. Such a dear, kind letter, dated 6th of August only. Affairs were very different then, and he said that Lavinia's distress about us was such that he must try to send her nearer to us. And such an unexpected piece of news! Oh, my heart fails me! I cannot fancy Lavinia a mother. Slowly I dressed myself, and still more slowly I combed Anna. I could think of nothing else until I heard Miriam and Mr. Bradford call us to take a walk, when we hurried down to them. A race down to the railroad, a merry talk standing on the track, mingled with shouts of laughter in which I tried to drown fears for Lavinia, made the early sunset clouds pass away sooner than usual to us, and moonlight warned us to return. Mrs. Worley passed us in her buggy, coming to stay all night; and halfway a servant met us, saying 2 soldiers had come to call on us. Once there, I was surprised to find that one was Frank Enders, the one I least expected to see. The other was a Mr. Harold. I need not describe him beyond this slight indication of his style. Before half an hour was over, he remarked to Anna that I was a very handsome girl, and addressed me as "Miss Sallie." That is sufficient. Then Will Carter came in and joined our circle. His first aside was, "If you only knew how much I liked you last night, you would never be cruel to me again. Why, I thought you the greatest girl in the world. Please let's part friends to night again." I would not promise, for I knew I would tease him yet, and at supper, when I insisted on his taking a glass of milk, his face turned so red that Mrs. Carter pinched my arm blue, and refused to help me to preserves because I was making Will mad. But Waller helped me, and I drank my own milk to Mr. Carter's health with my sweetest smile. "Confound that milkman! I wish he had cut his throat before I stumbled over him," he exclaimed after tea. But I had more amusing game than to make him angry then. I wanted to laugh to get rid of the phantom that pursued me, Lavinia. The evening passed off very pleasantly. I think there were some 18 of us in the parlor. About 10 the General went to the sugar house he commenced grinding yesterday and whispered to me to bring the young people down presently. Mr. Bradford and I succeeded in moving them, and we 3 girls retired to change our pretty dresses for plain ones, and get shawls and nuages, for our warm week had suddenly passed away, and it was quite cold out. Some of the gentlemen remarked that very few young ladies would have the courage to change pretty evening dresses for calico, after appearing to such advantage. Many would prefer wearing such dresses, however inappropriate, to the sugar mill. With his droll gravity, Gibbes answered, "Oh, our girls don't want to be stuck up." There was quite a string of us as we straggled out in the beautiful moonlight, with only Mrs. Badger as an escort. Mr. Enders and I had a gay walk of it, and when we all met at the furnace, we stopped and warmed ourselves, and had a laugh before going in. Inside, it was lighted up with Confederate gas, in other words, pine torches, which shed a delightful light, neither too much nor too little, over the different rooms. We tried each by turns. The row of bubbling kettles, with the dusky negroes bending over in the steam, and lightly turning their paddles in the foamy syrup, the whole under the influence of torchlight, was very interesting. But then Mr. Enders and I found a place more pleasant still. It was in the first purgery, standing at the mouth of the chute through which the liquid sugar runs into the car, and taking the place of the car as soon as it was run off to the coolers, each armed with a paddle, scraped the colon up, and had our own fun while eating. Then running along the little railroad to where the others stood in the second room over the vats, and racing back again all together to eat sugar cane and cut up generally around our first pine torch, we had really a gay time. Presently, "Puss wants a corner" was suggested, and all flew up to the second staging, under the cane carrier and by the engine. Such racing for corners! Such scuffles among the gentlemen! Such confusion among the girls, when, springing forward for a place, we would find it already occupied! All dignity was discarded. We laughed and ran as loud and fast as any children, and the General enjoyed our fun as much as we, and encouraged us in our pranks. Waller surpassed himself. Mr. Bradford carried all by storm. Mr. Enders looked like a schoolboy on a frolic. Mr. Carter looked sullen and tried lazily not to mar the sport completely, while Mr. Harold looked timidly foolish and half afraid of our wild sport. Mrs. Badger laughed, the General roared, Anna flew around like a balloon, Miriam fairly danced around with fun and frolic, while I laughed so that it was an exertion to change corners. Then forfeits followed, with the usual absurd formalities, in which Mr. Bradford sentenced himself unconsciously to ride a barrel, Miriam to make him a love speech going home, Mr. Enders to kiss my hand, and I to make him, Mr. Enders, a declaration, which I instantly did, in French. whereby I suffered no inconvenience, as Miriam alone comprehended. Then came more sugar cane and talk in the purgery, and we were horrified when Mrs. Badger announced that it was 12 o'clock, and gave orders to retire. Oh, the pleasant walk home! Then, of course, followed a last good night on the balcony, while the two young men mounted their horses, and Frank Enders vowed to slip off every time he had a chance, and come out to see us. Then there was a grand proposition for a ride to Port Hudson on horseback, and in order to secure a pledge that we would pass by General Beale's headquarters, Mr. Enders wrapped my nuage around his throat, declaring that I would be obliged to stop there for it, though if prevented, he would certainly be obliged to bring it back himself. This morning, however, the married ladies made so much difficulty about who should go and how, that we were forced to abandon it, much as we would have enjoyed it. I'm afraid to say how late it was when we got to bed. I know it was almost 10 when we left the breakfast table this morning, so I suppose it must have been quite late before we retired. To Colonel Allen's, as well as to our own great disappointment, the band could not come on account of sickness. November 6th. We three girls fancied a walk last evening, and immediately after dinner prepared to walk to Mrs. Breaux's, only a mile, and get her to come to the sugar house. But as we put on our bonnets, Captain Bradford, brother of the one who left in the morning, was announced, and our expedition had to be abandoned. This is the third of the 5 brothers that I have met, and if it were not for the peculiarity in their voices, I should say that there was not the most distant relationship existing between them. This one is very handsome, quiet, and what Dickens calls "in a high shouldered state of deportment." He looks like a moss covered stone wall, a slumbering volcano, a what you please, so it suggests anything unexpected and dangerous to stumble over. A man of indomitable will and intense feeling, I am sure. I should not like to rouse his temper, or give him cause to hate me. A trip to the sugar house followed, as a matter of course, and we showed him around, and told him of the fun we had those 2 nights, and taught him how to use a paddle like a Christian. We remained there until supper time, when we adjourned to the house, where we spent the remainder of the evening very pleasantly. At least, I suppose he found it so, for it was 10 o'clock before he left. Just now I was startled by a pistol shot. Threatening to shoot her, Mr. Carter playfully aimed Miriam's pistol at her, and before he could take fair aim, one barrel went off, the shot grazing her arm, and passing through the armoir just behind. Of course there was great consternation. Those two seemed doomed to kill each other. She had played him the same trick before. He swore that he would have killed himself with the other shot if she had been hurt, but what good would that do her? Sunday, November 9th. I hardly know how these last days have passed. I have an indistinct recollection of rides in cane wagons to the most distant field, coming back perched on the top of the cane, singing "Dye my petticoats," to the great amusement of the General, who followed on horseback. Anna and Miriam, comfortably reposing in corners, were too busy to join in, as their whole time and attention were entirely devoted to the consumption of cane. It was only by singing rough impromptus on Mr. Harold and Captain Bradford that I roused them from their task long enough to join in a chorus of 40,000 Chinese. I would not have changed my perch, 4 mules, and black driver for Queen Victoria's coach and 6. And to think old Abe wants to deprive us of all that fun! No more cotton, sugar cane, or rice; no more old black aunties or uncles; no more rides in mule teams; no more songs in the cane fields; no more steaming kettles; no more black faces and shining teeth around the furnace fires. If Lincoln could spend the grinding season on a plantation, he would recall his proclamation. As it is, he has only proved himself a fool, without injuring us. Why, last evening I took old Wilson's place at the bagasse shoot, and kept the rollers free from cane until I had thrown down enough to fill several carts, and had my hands as black as his. What cruelty to slaves! And Black Frank thinks me cruel, too, when he meets me with a patronizing grin and shows me the nicest vats of candy, and peels cane for me. Oh, very cruel! And so does Jules when he wipes the handle of his paddle on his apron to give "Mamselle" a chance to skim the kettles and learn how to work. Yes, and so do all the rest who meet us with a courtesy and "Howdy, young missus." Last night we girls sat on the wood just in front of the furnace, rather Miriam and Anna did, while I sat in their laps, and with some 20 of all ages crowded around, we sang away to their great amusement. Poor oppressed devils! Why did you not chunk us with the burning logs, instead of looking happy and laughing like fools? Really, some good old abolitionist is needed here, to tell them how miserable they are. Can't Mass' Abe spare a few to enlighten his brethren? November 10th, Monday. In spite of its being Sunday, no sooner was dinner concluded yesterday than we adjourned as usual to the sugar house, to see how much damage we could do. Each took from a negro his long paddle, and for more than half an hour skimmed the kettles industriously, to the amazement of half a dozen strange soldiers, who came to see the extraordinary process of sugar making. At one time, the two boys taking possession of the two other paddles, not a negro was at the kettles, but stood inspecting our work. The hardest part we found to be discharging the batteries, which none of us could do without their assistance. We had no sooner relinquished our paddles than some one announced two gentlemen at the house. While we were discussing the possibility of changing our dresses before being seen, enter Mr. Enders and Gibbes Morgan of Fenner's battery. No retreat being possible, we looked charmed and self possessed in spite of plain calicoes and sticky hands. Mr. Enders very conveniently forgot to bring my nuage; he says he started expressly to do so, but reflecting that I might then have no inducement to pay that visit to Port Hudson, he left it for another time. We arranged a visit to Gibbes, and Mr. Enders made me promise to call at General Beale's headquarters for a pass. They will want you to go to the Provost Marshal's for it, but you just come to General Beale's and send a courier for me, and I will bring it myself. And half in fun, half in earnest, I promised. End of Book 3, Part 9. Part 10 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 10, November 12th to December 4th, 1862. November 12th, Wednesday. Once more a cripple, and consigned to my bed, for how long, Heaven only knows. This is written while in a horizontal position, reposing on my right arm, which is almost numb from having supported me for some 16 hours without turning over. Let me see if I can remember how it happened. Last evening we started out to see Gibbes, just Miriam and Anna in one buggy, and Mrs. Badger and I in the other. Gibbes proper, that is, the Captain, and the General both approved, but neither could accompany us. It is useless to say how much I objected to going without a gentleman. Indeed, when we reached the road which formed the fourth side of the square formed by Colonel Breaux's, Captain Bradford's, and Captain Fenner's camps, I thought I should die of terror on finding myself in such a crowd of soldiers on parade. My thick veil alone consoled me, but I made a vow that I would not go through it again, not if I never saw Gibbes, Jr., again on earth. His camp lay far off from the road, so that we had to drive out to it between the other two, and asked a soldier to tell him that we were there. Presently he came up, looking so pleased that I was almost glad that we had come; and then Captain Fenner appeared, looking charmed, and Lieutenant Harris, who looked more alarmed and timid than I. Captain Fenner exerted himself to entertain us, and seeing how frightened I was, assured me that it was an everyday occurrence for young ladies to visit them in parties without gentlemen, and that it was done all through the Confederacy. Which, however, did not comfort me for the hundreds of eyes that were looking at us as our small party stood out in front of the encampment around a cannon. I think he can throw more expression into his eyes than any one I ever saw. Miriam suggested sending Gibbes to the Provost to get our pass, in order to avoid the crowd that might be there. Eager to leave the present one for a more retired spot, I exclaimed, "Oh, no, let us go ourselves. We can't get in a worse crowd." I meant a greater, but Captain Fenner looked so comically at me that I could scarcely laugh out an apology; while he laughed so that I am sure he did not listen to me. What a comical mouth! I liked him very much this time. He promised to come out to day or to morrow and have a game of Puss Wants a Corner in the sugar house. But now I can't join in, though it was to me the promise was made. But to the catastrophe at once. As we left, we insisted on taking Gibbes to get our pass, and made him get into Miriam's buggy, where there was space for him to kneel and drive. I was to carry out my promise to Mr. Enders. We had to pass just by the camp of the 1st Alabama, Colonel Steadman's, where the whole regiment was on parade. We had not gone 30 yards beyond them when a gun was discharged. The horse instantly ran off. I don't believe there could be two cooler individuals than Mrs. Badger and I were. I had every confidence in her being able to hold him so long as the bridle lasted. I had heard that there was more danger in jumping at such moments than in remaining quiet, so I sat still. There was nothing to hold to, as it was a no top, or what I call a low neck buggy, so my hands rested quietly in my lap. Presently I saw the left rein snap close to the horse's mouth. I knew all was over then, but did not utter a word. Death seemed inevitable, and I thought it as well to take it coolly. The horse turned abruptly. I felt that something impelled me out, followed the impulse, saw Mrs. Badger's white cape fluttering above me, received a blow on the extremity of my spine that I thought would kill me before I reached the ground, landing, however, on my left hip and quietly reclining on my left elbow, with my face to an upset buggy whose wheels spun around in empty air. I heard a rush as of horses. I saw men galloping up. I would have given worlds to spring to my feet, or even to see if they were exposed, but found I could not move. I had no more power over my limbs than if they were iron, only the intense pain told me I was still alive. I was perfectly conscious, but unable to move. My only wonder was why Miriam, who was in front, did not come to me. My arm was giving away. Dimly, as through a haze or dream, I saw a soldier bending over me, trying to raise me. The horse he had sprung from rushed up to his master and reared up over me. I saw the iron hoofs shining above my body. Death was certain this time, but I could not move. He raised his arm and struck him, and obedient to the blow, the animal turned aside and let his feet fall without crushing me. Mrs. Carter, when she heard it described, offered a fabulous sum for a correct drawing of that most interesting tableau, the gallant Alabamian supporting a helpless form on one arm, while he reined in a fiery charger with the other. I was not aware of the romance. I was conscious only of the unpleasant situation. Dozens crowded around, and if I had been a girl for display, here was an opportunity, for 30 pair of soldier arms were stretched out to hold me. "No, Gibbes, Gibbes!" I whispered, and had the satisfaction of being transferred from a stranger's to my cousin's arms. Gibbes trembled more than I, but with both arms clasped around me, held me up. But for that, I would have returned to my original horizontal position. "Send for the doctor!" cried one. "A surgeon, quick!" cried another. "Tell them no," I motioned. I was conscious of a clatter of hoofs and cloud of dust. One performed a feat never heard of before. He brought a glass of water at full gallop, which I instantly drained by way of acknowledgment. I think I felt the unpleasant situation more than the pain. Not being accustomed to being the centre of attraction, I was by no means pleased with the novel experience. Miriam held my hand and questioned me with a voice tremulous with fear and laughter. Anna convulsively sobbed or giggled some question. I felt the ridiculous position as much as they. Laughing was agony, but I had to do it to give them an excuse, which they readily seized to give vent to their feelings; and encouraged by seeing it, several gold band officers joined in, constantly endeavoring to apologize or check themselves with a "Really, miss, it may seem unfeeling, but it is impossible." The rest was lost in a gasp, and a wrestle between politeness and the desire to laugh. I don't know what I was thinking of, but I certainly paid very little attention to what was going on. I only wanted to get home, away from all those eyes, and my most earnest wish made me forget them. The first remark I heard was my young Alabamian crying, "It is the most beautiful somerset I ever saw. Indeed, it could not be more gracefully done. Your feet did not show." Naïf, but it was just what I wanted to know, and dared not ask. Some one ran up and asked who was hurt, and I heard another reply, "I'm afraid the young lady is seriously injured, only she won't acknowledge it. It is worth while looking at her. She is the coolest, most dignified girl you ever saw." And another was added to the already too numerous audience. Poor Mrs. Badger, having suffered only from torn clothing, received very little sympathy, while I got more than my share. I really believe that the blow I received was from her 240-pound body, though the Alabamian declares he saw the overturning buggy strike me as I fell. To her and others I am indebted for the repetition of many a remark that escaped me. One bold soldier boy exclaimed, "Madam, we are all warriors, but we can't equal that. It is braver than any man." I had to laugh occasionally to keep my spirits up, but Miriam ordered me to quit, saying that I would go off in hysterics. I had previously repeatedly declared to the doctor that I was not hurt, and seeing him idle, and hearing Miriam's remark, the Alabamian, I am told, cried, "Oh, doctor, doctor, can't you do something? Is she going to have hysterics?" "Really," said the doctor, "the young lady objects to being examined. But as far as I can judge, she has no broken limbs." Everybody ordered me to confess at once my injury; but how was I to inform a whole crowd that I had probably broken the tip of my backbone and could not possibly sit down? So I adhered to my first affirmation, and made no objection when they piled the cushions up and made Gibbes put me down, for I knew he must be tired. I am told I remained there an hour. I know they talked to me and that I answered, but have not an idea of the subject. A gentleman brought a buggy and offered to drive me home, but a Captain Lenair insisted on running after the ambulance. Arrived there, Mr. Enders says he rushed in, crying, "For God's sake, General Beale, lend me the ambulance! There is a dreadful accident, and I am afraid the young lady will die." Coming back, he exclaimed, "By Jove, boys, if you want to see a sight, run down and see her hair! The prettiest auburn you ever looked at, and sweeps the ground. I wouldn't mind such a fall if I had such hair to show. Come, look at it, do!" Mr. Enders says he was sure that it was I as soon as hair was mentioned, and started out as soon as he had finished a duty he had to perform. My garter, a purple silk ribbon, lay in the centre of the ring. By the respectful silence observed, I saw they recognized its use; so, unwilling to leave such a relic behind, I asked aloud for my "ribbon," whereupon Anna says the officers pinched each other and smiled. Up came the ambulance, and I was in imminent danger of being carried to it, when with a desperate effort I regained my feet with Gibbes's help, and reached it without other assistance. Beyond, I could do no more. Captain Lenair got inside, and several others lifted me up to him, and I sank motionless on the floor. All bade me good bye, and my little Alabamian assured me that he was proud of having been the first to assist me. President Miller whispered to Mrs. Badger for permission to accompany us, which she readily granted, and raising me on the seat, he insisted on putting his arm around me to hold me up. It was useless to decline. "Now, Miss Morgan, I assure you I am an old married man. I know you are suffering. Let me have my way." And the kind old gentleman held me so comfortably, and broke the force of so many jolts, that I was forced to submit, and acknowledge that had it not been for him, I could not have endured the rough road. At the gate that leads to General Beale's headquarters, I saw half a dozen figures standing. One was Frank Enders, who hailed the driver. "Hush!" said one I recognized as Captain Lenair. "The young lady is in there, and the Provost, too." "I don't care if it is Jeff Davis. I'll find out if she is hurt," he answered. Miriam and Anna recognized him as they followed behind us, and called to him. Without more ado, he jumped into their buggy, finding them alone, and drove them home. He asked me something as he passed, but I could not answer. The road was dreadful. Once the driver mistook it and drove us within 2 steps of an embankment 6 feet high, but discovered the mistake before the horses went over. What I most dreaded was explanations when we should arrive. Miriam stepped out an instant before, and I heard her telling the accident. Then everybody, big and little, white and black, gathered around the ambulance. The Provost thought himself privileged to carry me. Gibbes insisted on trying it with his one arm, when the General picked me up and landed me on the gallery. He wanted me to lie down in old Mrs. Carter's room, but confident that once there I could not get up, and feeling that perhaps the gentleman would take advantage of its being on the ground floor to suggest calling on me, I struggled upstairs with Helen's assistance. A dozen hands undressed me and laid me on my face in bed, which position I have occupied up to the present, 3 P.M. Unable to turn, all night I lay awake, lying on my face, the least comfortable of positions, but though the slightest motion tortured me, I had to laugh as we talked it over. Of course this has been written in scratches in my same position, which will account for many blots. This morning I was interrupted by mother's unexpected arrival, she having come with Delllie and Morgan to spend the day. Of course she is horrified at the accident of that unfortunate Sarah. Saturday, November 15th. I think I grow no better rapidly. Fortunately, on Wednesday night they succeeded in turning me over, for my poor elbows, having lost all their skin, were completely used up. Now, if I go slowly and carefully, I can turn myself at the cost of some little suffering. Yesterday, Colonel Steadman of the 1st Alabama called with his father. He sent me many messages of condolence, and the rather unpleasant advice to be cupped and scarified. His profession was that of a physician before he became Colonel. His surgeon, whose name is Madding, told him he was satisfied that I was seriously injured, though I had not complained. The Colonel is the same who called when we were in Clinton. They readily accepted our invitation to dinner, and remained until late in the afternoon, when Captain Bradford came in. More messages of condolence and sympathy upstairs, which produced no visible effect on my spine, though very comforting to the spirit. November 16th. I was interrupted yesterday morning by Mrs. Badger, who wished to apply a few dry cups to my back, to which I quietly submitted, and was unable to move afterwards without pain, as a reward for my patience. But towards sunset came two dear letters that made me forget what I had suffered, one from George and one from Jimmy, dated Bermudas. For the first time I know what my dear little brother suffered during those long months when we could not hear if he were dead or alive. He kept the secret until he no longer needed either friends or money, and now he tells it with a simplicity that made me cry fit to break my heart when I was left alone in the twilight with no one to see. George comforts me with hopes of peace and a speedy return. If it could only be! This morning the boom of Yankee guns reached my ears, a sound I had hoped never to hear again. It is only those poor devils I can afford to pity them in their fallen state banging away at some treasonable sugar houses that are disobedient enough to grind cane on the other side of the river. I hear that one is at Mrs. Cain's. The sound made my heart throb. What if the fight should come off before I can walk? It takes 3 people to raise me, whenever it is necessary for me to move. I am worse than helpless. Tuesday, November 18th. A note just came from mother, telling me that the most awful Yankees were coming to burn Linwood and take Port Hudson, and so this evening I must walk down to the cars with a chair to rest in until they came, and must certainly be in Clinton to night. Delightful arrangement! I wrote to ask if she knew that my legs were of no more service to me than to her. Dr. Dortch has again been murdering me, says perhaps I can stand by Sunday. If the Yankees come before Friday night, November 21st. Lying on my face, as it were, with my poor elbows for a support, I try to pass away these lonely hours. For, with the exception of old Mrs. Carter, who is downstairs, and the General, who is elsewhere, Anna and I are the only white people on the place. The cause of this heartless desertion is a grand display of tableaux vivants at Jackson for the benefit of the Soldiers' Hospital. And of course it would be sinful to stay away, particularly as Anna is a great deal better, and I need no care. Note by Morgan Dawson. A page is here torn from the diary. It evidently related the beginning of an incident of which my sister and I have often heard our mother tell; how, after the Jackson tableau, our Aunt Miriam laughingly staked herself in a game of cards with Will Carter, and lost. The sequel follows, the scene at the house of his uncle, General Carter, beginning in the middle of a sentence. End of note. Thursday, December 4th. It would be only the absurd tableau I agreed to, with plenty of fun, and nothing more. So I tried to be merry and content, and so I should have been, for there was plenty to talk about, and every one was so solicitous for my comfort. And there was Mr. Enders, who would wheel my chair for me wherever I wished it, and was as kind and attentive as a brother. Surely my first trip should have been a gay one. Miriam sat down by the piano, Mr. Enders drew me by her, and we 3 sang until dark together. A Mr. Morse, his wife, and mother, who were spending a week here, were our audience. The first 2 retired at candlelight, while the latter, present at the play the night before, remained to the last. But while we sang, every noise at the parlor door caused us to turn with apprehension of we hardly knew what. A dozen times Mr. Enders consulted his watch, and telegraphed his fears to me, though I persisted in thinking it only the fun that had been intended. 6:30 came, and with it Mrs. Worley. Now she knew better, for Dr. Dortch had come to see me, and was guiding me in my game of euchre, in which I was not even as wise as my partner, Mr. Enders, when her note came. Instantly we put down our cards, while Miriam begged him to write and tell her the true story. He wrote, and we all read it. Not only that, but Miriam added a postscript which I think was this, word for word: "Mrs. Worley, it is only a bet at cards, intended as the merest joke. There is not a word of truth in it, and I will consider it the greatest favor if you will contradict the report whenever you may hear it." Explicit enough, one would think; but still she came, and sent word into the parlor that one of the ladies present when Will made the announcement had sent her contribution to the evening's fun. It turned out to be a complete bridal suit, worn by the lady a year ago. That was too serious a jest. Miriam went into the other room to speak to Mrs. Worley, who, cold as an icicle, refused to receive or make explanation, beyond "I won't kiss you; this is too cruel." There was nothing to do; she returned laughing, but certainly feeling herself the injured one; and so she was. In 15 minutes another stir. I held my breath with expectation. Lydia introduced Mr. G. 10 miles he had ridden through mud and water that freezing evening, at Will Carter's request, to perform the ceremony between him and Miriam. Lydia laughed until she could hardly introduce him. He, hat in hand, bowed around the convulsed circle with a countenance shining with the most sublimely vacant expression. Oh, that man's idiotic face and solemn, portentous look brought a writhe even to my trembling lips. Mr. Enders would have given one an excellent idea of the effect produced by a real old piney woods chill; he shook as with suppressed laughter. But when the tremendous preacher, tremendous because composed of gigantic nothing, turned his lugubrious face towards Mrs. Morse, and addressed her as Mrs. Morgan, under the impression that she had come down to see her daughter married, Miriam's risibles could no longer stand it, and she flew from the room in time to avoid a disgraceful explosion. I was growing frightened. Mr. Enders was leaning over my chair, and involuntarily it burst from me with a groan, "For God's sake, help me save her!" "Hush! Lie back in your chair. I will," he whispered. "But for the love of Heaven, save my sister! I'll do what you will, if you will only keep still and not hurt yourself. I'll do my best." It was all whispered, that the minister and Mrs. Morse might not hear. "If it were your sister, what would you do?" "My God, I'd meet him on the front balcony and kick him out! Then I'd know one of us must die to morrow. But under the circumstances it is impossible for Gibbes to act," I urged, while we agreed that it was the most unwarrantable piece of insolence ever perpetrated. While we talked, Gibbes had seized Miriam, and, without interfering or advising further, advised her to keep her room and not meet Will. But I skipped the most important part. She came back when she had recovered her composure, and sat by me. Mr. Enders, when I asked what was best to do, whispered that to spare Will's feelings and avoid a most painful scene, as well as to show that she had no serious intentions whatever, she should see that the minister was put in full possession of the facts before it went any farther. He felt keenly his unpleasant situation, and it was only our earnest request that induced him to remain or give his advice. Who should explain? Certainly not the General; he thought the joke carried too far, and retired to his room before Mr. G came. How take part against his own nephew? Not Gibbes either, for he had gone upstairs too worried and annoyed to talk to any one. Besides, it was his wife's cousin. Who, then? Miriam is one woman in 1,000. Rising, she crossed the room slowly, and as dignified as though she only meant to warm herself. I think I see her before me now, as she stood before the fire, facing Mr. G, looking so handsome and stylish in her black grenadine with the pale green trimming, telling her story. Plainly, earnestly, distinctly, without hurry or embarrassment, in the neatest, prettiest, most admirable speech I ever heard, she told everything just as it was. Bravo for Miriam! There lives not the woman in this State who could do so painful a thing in such a beautiful way. I felt like hugging her. Oh, it was magnificent! He heard her in surprise, but when once satisfied of its truth, he said, "Well, Miss Morgan, when you stand on the floor, when I ask if you will, it is your privilege to answer no." Miriam is not one to do so cruel a thing. She is too noble to deceive him so far, and wound him so cruelly before all, when he believed himself so near happiness. She said that it was mockery; she would not suffer him to believe for an instant that she meant to marry him. If he believed it, he was deceiving himself wilfully, for he already knew that she had told him it could never be. He agreed to take it only as a jest, promised that he would not feel hurt, and with the most admirable tact, Miriam, the trump I have been playing euchre, excuse me settled the minister and the wedding by her splendid behavior, with no trouble. A rapid step was heard in the hall. The bridegroom had come. I know he must have killed his horse. He certainly did not leave his house before 1 o'clock. It is 20 miles by the road to Clinton. He went there, procured his license, and was here at 7 in full costume. He bounded upstairs to meet the bride elect. I can fancy him going to Clinton, doubting, fearing, believing against all evidence, yet trembling, securing the license at last, persuading himself that she would not dare refuse when the deeds were recorded in court and he held them in his hand; and very few women would have been brave enough, too. He did not know my Miriam. I can fancy the poor horse lashed through the heavy mire, tired, foaming, panting, while his strong arm urged it on with whip and spur. I can hear the exulting beating of his heart, that wild refrain that was raging as his death knell. Mine, mine at last! I could hear it, I say. It rung in my ears all night. He held her in his power; she must be his. Hastily, yet carefully, he performs his toilet. I dare say he stopped to think which cravat she liked best. Mine, mine, the song is ringing in every stroke of his throbbing breast. Mount! Mount! 2 miles fly past. He sweeps through the moonlight like Death riding on a pale horse. Yonder shine lights in the parlor, and that above, is it hers? He throws himself from his horse. His hour has come, hers too, with the license and minister, his own adoration, and she must love him too. He will win. Show him the way to her. She is his forever now. His? My God! Had I not reason to cry, "In God's name, save her, Frank!" He reaches Mrs. Carter's room, and triumphantly throws the license on her table. He is ready now. Where is his bride? Some one meets him. Will! The story is told. She is not to be won by force. She has appealed to the minister. He has carried the jest too far. The strong man reels. He falls on the bed in his bridal array, in agony too great for tears. I dare not ask what followed. They tell me it was awful. What madness and folly to dream of forcing her to marry him! Why, if she had loved him, the high handed proceeding would have roused the lion of her spirit. He is no mate for her. He has but one thought, and at last words come. "Miriam, Miriam, call her for the love of God!" One word, one look, oh, she will take pity on him in his misery. Let her come for one instant. She cannot be so cruel; she will marry him if only to save him from death or worse. And fortunate it was that he was not armed; one of the two would have died. Perhaps both. The heartbroken prayer goes on. The exulting "Mine, mine!" has changed to the groan of despair. "Miriam, for the love of God, come to me!" And where is the bride? Gibbes has her caged in the next room, this one where I am now lying. He has advised her not to appear, to go to bed and say no more. Sent to bed like a baby on her wedding night! She says that she laughed aloud when the door closed on her. She laughing in here, he groaning in there, it is to be hoped they each drowned the voice of the other. The minister said good night. He disclaimed all feeling of pique; he felt chiefly for the young lady and the disappointed groom. Ouf! I sent to ask Will to come to me alone for a moment. No, he could not see me. Write to him. Slowly, as though an aged, infirm, tottering man, we heard him descending the steps. How different from the step that carried him up! We, conscience stricken, sat within with the doors closed. He was off. He has again mounted his horse; and the broken hearted man, hardly less cruel than the expectant bridegroom, dashes the rowel in his side, and disappears like a whirlwind. I can fancy mother's and Lilly's agony when they hear of the wedding. All Clinton knew it last night, and if they did too, I know there was as little sleep for them as for us. I know mother shrieked, "My child! My child!" while Lilly cried. How could he believe she meant to marry him without even sending word to mother when he was going to the very town? Bah! What a jolly go if those two got hysterics about the supposed moral suicide! Glad I was not at the tea party. Well, fearing the effect of such a shock in mother's nervous state, Gibbes advised Miriam to go on the cars this evening, and convince her that it had not occurred, court records and licenses and ministers to the contrary notwithstanding. So my duck, my angel, she whom I call my Peri with the singed wings (children who play in the fire must expect to be burned), set off on her pious errand, without the protecting arm of her bridegroom. End of Book 3, Part 10. Part 11 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 11, December 7th, 1862 to January 4th, 1863. Sunday, 7th December. I have had a shock. While writing alone here almost all have gone to church I heard a step ascending the stair. What, I asked, if it should be Will? Then I blamed myself for supposing such a thing possible. Slowly it came nearer and nearer. I raised my head, and was greeted with a ghastly smile. I held out my hand. "Will!" Sarah. Misery discards ceremony. He stood before me the most woebegone, heartbroken man I ever saw. With a forced laugh, he said, "Where is my bride? Pshaw! I know she has gone to Clinton. I have come to talk to you. Wasn't it a merry wedding?" The hollow laugh rang again. I tried to jest, but failed. "Sit down and let me talk to you," I said. He was in a wayward humor, cut to the heart, ready to submit to a touch of silk, or to resist a grasp of iron. This was the man I had to deal with, and get from him something he clung to as to not his life, but Miriam. And I know so little how to act in such a case, know so little about dealing gently with wild natures. He alarmed me at first. His forced laugh ceased. He said that he meant to keep that license always. It was a joke on him yesterday, but with that in his possession the tables would be turned on her. He would show it to her occasionally. It should keep her from marrying any one else. I said that it would be demanded, though. He must deliver it. The very devil shot in his eye as he exclaimed fiercely, "If any one dares demand it, I'll die before giving it up. If God Almighty came, I'd say no. I'll die with it first." O merciful Father, I thought, what misery is to come of this jest? He must relinquish it. Gibbes will force him into it, or die in the attempt. George would come from Virginia. Jimmy would cross the seas. And I was alone in here to deal with such a spirit. I commenced gently. Would he do Miriam such a wrong? It was no wrong, he said. Let him follow his own will. "You profess to love her?" I asked. "Profess! Great God! How can you? I adore her! I tell you that in spite of all this, I love her not more, that is impossible, but as much as ever. Look at my face and ask that!" burst from him with the wildest impulse. "Very well. This girl you love, then, you mean to make miserable. You stand forever between her and her happiness because you love her. Is this love?" He was sullenly silent. I went on: "Not only her happiness, but her honor is concerned. You who love her so, do her this foul injury." "Would it affect her reputation?" he asked. "Ask yourself, is it quite right that you should hold in your hands the evidence that she is Mrs. Carter, when you know she is not, and never will be? Is it quite honorable?" "In God's name, would it injure Miriam? I'd rather die than grieve her." My iron was melted, but too hot to handle. I put it on one side, satisfied that I, and I only, had saved Miriam from injury and 3 brothers from bloodshed, by using his insane love as a lever. It does not look as hard here as it was in reality, but it was of the hardest struggles I ever had; indeed, it was desperate. I had touched the right key, and, satisfied of success, turned the subject to let him believe he was following his own suggestions. When I told him he must free Miriam from all blame, that I had encouraged the jest against her repeated remonstrances, and was alone to blame, he generously took it on himself. "I was so crazy about her," he said, "that I would have done it anyhow. I would have run any risk for the faintest chance of obtaining her, and much more to the same purpose, that, though very generous in him, did not satisfy my conscience." But he surprised me by saying that he was satisfied that if I had been in my room, and he had walked into the parlor with the license, she would have married him. What infatuation! He says, though, that I only prevented it; that my influence, by my mere presence, is stronger than his words. I don't say that it is so; but if I helped save her, thank Heaven! It is impossible to say one half that passed, but he showed me his determination to act just as he has heretofore, and take it all as a joke, that no blame might be attached to her. Besides, I'd rather die than not see her. I laugh, but you don't know what I suffer. Poor fellow! I saw it in his swimming eyes. At last he got up to go before they returned from church. "Beg her to meet me as she always has. I told Mrs. Worley that she must treat her just the same, because I love her so. And say I go to Clinton to morrow, to have that record effaced, and deliver up the license. I would not grieve her; indeed, I love her too well." His voice trembled as well as his lips. He took my hand, saying, "You are hard on me. I could make her happy, I know, because I worship her so. I have been crazy about her for 3 years. You can't call it a mere fancy. Why are you against me? But God bless you. Good bye." And he was gone. Why? Oh, Will, because I love my sister too much to see her miserable merely to make you happy. Friday, 12th December. My cripple friend that I mentioned so far back continues to send me the most affecting messages. He is really wretched about me, never was more distressed, thinks of nothing else, and so on through the whole list. To cap the climax, he sends me word that he can now walk on crutches, and the first time he can venture in a buggy means to call on me. Que le ciel m'en préserve! What could we talk about? His'n and her'n several misfortunes? That's too bad! Every one teases me unmercifully about my new conquest. I can't help but be amused; and yet beware, young girls, of expressing sympathy, even for soldiers. There is no knowing what effect it may produce. Sunday, December 14th. Yesterday evening, some time before sunset, Mr. Enders was announced, to our great surprise, as we knew he had been in Clinton all the week, having been transferred there instead of to Jackson, as he threatened. He was the most miserable, unhappy creature one could possibly imagine, even too melancholy for me to laugh at him, which expresses the last degree of wretchedness. To all our questions he had but one answer, that he had had the most dreadful attack of "blues" ever since he was here Sunday; that he had waited every evening at the cars, expecting us, and at last, seeing that we had no intention of coming, he could no longer stand the temptation, so got permission to come down for a day to Port Hudson, so he could come out to see us. Before we could fairly get him cheerful, Will Carter and Ned Badger, who returned only this week from Kentucky, entered. Will was in a bad humor, and wanted to vent it on us; so after waiting some time, he proposed that the two young men should go with him, pocketing at the same moment the cards which had won Miriam, and saying they would have a nice game together, and just the rarest old whiskey. He looked around to see the effect produced. We girls did not move, but Mr. Enders said he must really return immediately to Port Hudson, and start for Clinton from there in the night. Will thought it would be such a triumph over us to carry him off, that he insisted. They'd have a fine time, cure the blues, etc. Ned was more than willing, and at last Mr. Enders said, well, he felt just so desperate that he did not care what he did; he believed he would go. I saw he was in a reckless humor, and that Will knew it, too, and I promised to make at least an effort to save him. Miriam spoke to him apart, but he said that he had promised now, he must go. Will ran down triumphant to mount his horse, calling him to follow. All ran out to see him off, when Frank came back to tell me good bye. I seized the opportunity, and didn't I plead! I told him I would not ask him to stay here, though he knew we would be happy to have him stay, and begged him to go back to the camp, and leave Will alone. I suggested other resources, talked of his mother whom he idolizes, pleaded like a grandmother, and just as I wound up, came Will's voice from below, "Why the devil don't you come, Enders? Hurry!" He moved a step, looked at me. I dropped my head without a word. Here I must confess to the most consummate piece of acting. I am sorry, but as long as it saved him from doing what I knew he would have cause to regret, I am not ashamed of having tried it. Will called impatiently again, as he stood hesitating before me. I did not say "Stay." I just gave the faintest sigh imaginable. He went down and told Will he would not go. Of course, Will went off in a rage with us. Friday, December 26th, 1862. Monday, Dr. Woods and Mr. Van Ingen stopped, just from their regiment in Kentucky, and on their way home, and I begged so hard to see the doctor, and promised so faithfully to retire if I suffered too much, that Mrs. Badger yielded, like an angel, and I carried my point. The doctor! We looked in vain at each other, I for my dandy friend in irreproachable broadcloth, immaculate shirt bosoms, and perfect boots; he for the brusque, impulsive girl who in ordinary circumstances would have run dancing into the parlor, would have given him half glad, half indifferent greeting, and then found either occasion to laugh at him, or would have turned elsewhere for amusement. We looked, I say, in vain. Before me stood my pattern of neatness in a rough uniform of brown homespun; a dark flannel shirt replaced the snowy cambric one, and there was neither cravat nor collar to mark the boundary line between his dark face and the still darker material. And the dear little boots! O ye gods and little fishes! They were clumsy and mud spattered. If my mouth twitched with laughter as I silently commented, the doctor's did not. I, who always danced on my way, came in lying back on my pillows, and wheeled in by a servant. The doctor's sympathy was really touching, and poor consolation he gave when he heard the story. You will recover to a certain extent, but will feel it more or less all your life. I am the ruin of all these puns. The gentlemen will hate me. I must learn to ignore their conundrums until they answer them themselves, and to wait patiently for the pun instead of catching it and laughing before it is half spoken. Why can't I do as the others do? There was Mr. Van Ingen with his constant stream of them, that I anticipated several times. He said to me, "If I were asked what town in Louisiana I would rather be in this evening, what would my answer be?" I should have looked perfectly innocent and politely inquisitive, but I did neither. I saw the answer instantly, and laughed. "Ah, you have guessed! I can see it in your eyes," he said. Of course I had, but I told him I was afraid to say it, for fear he might think I was flattering myself. Then we both laughed. The place he referred to was Bayou Sara. Yesterday, being a beautiful day, I was carried down, in honor of Christmas, to meet Captain Fenner and Mr. Duggan, who were to dine with us. The cars had brought Miriam a beautiful little set of collars and cuffs from Dellie, and the oddest, sweetest little set for me from Morgan for our Christmas gift. It is all Lilly. We had an exquisite Christmas gift the night before, a magnificent serenade, a compliment from Colonel Breaux. It very singularly happened that Miriam, Anna, and Ned Badger were sitting up in the parlor, watching alone for Christmas, when the band burst forth at the steps, and startled them into a stampede upstairs; but Gibbes, who came with the serenaders, caught them and brought them back into the parlor, where there were only 8 gentlemen; and in this novel, unheard of style, only these 2 girls, with Gibbes to play propriety, entertained all these people at midnight while the band played without. I commenced writing to day expressly to speak of our pleasant Christmas; yet it seems as though I would write about anything except that, since I have not come to it yet. Perhaps it is because I feel I could not do it justice. At least I can say who was there. At sunset came Captain Bradford and Mr. Conn, the first stalking in with all the assurance which a handsome face and fine person can lend, the second following with all the timidity of a first appearance. Again, after a long pause, the door swung open, and enter Mr. Halsey, who bows and takes the seat on the other side of me, and Mr. Bradford, of Colonel Allen memory, once more returned to his regiment, who laughs, shakes hands all around, and looks as happy as a schoolboy just come home for the holidays, who has never ending visions of plum cakes, puddings, and other sweet things. While all goes on merrily, another rap comes, and enters Santa Claus, dressed in the old uniform of the Mexican War, with a tremendous cocked hat, and a preposterous beard of false hair, which effectually conceal the face, and but for the mass of tangled short curls, no one could guess that the individual was Bud. It was a device of the General's which took us all by surprise. Santa Claus passes slowly around the circle, and pausing before each lady, draws from his basket a cake which he presents with a bow, while to each gentleman he presents a wineglass replenished from a most suspicious looking black bottle which also reposes there. Leaving us all wonder and laughter, Santa Claus retires with a basket much lighter than it had been at his entrance. Then follow refreshments, and more talk and laughter, until the clock strikes 12, when all these ghosts bid a hearty good night and retire. January 1st, Thursday, 1863. 1863! Why, I have hardly become accustomed to writing '62 yet. Where has this year gone? With all its troubles and anxieties, it is the shortest I ever spent. '61 and '62 together would hardly seem 365 days to me. Well, let time fly. Every hour brings us nearer our freedom, and we are 2 years nearer peace now than we were when South Carolina seceded. That is one consolation. I learn, to my unspeakable grief, that the State House is burned down. Sunday, January 4th. One just from Baton Rouge tells us that my presentiment about our house is verified. The Yankees do inhabit it, a Yankee colonel and his wife. They say they look strangely at home on our front gallery, pacing up and down, and a stranger and a Yankee occupies our father's place at the table where he presided for 31 years, and the old lamp that lighted up so many eager, laughing faces around the dear old table night after night, that with its great beaming eye watched us one by one as we grew up and left our home, that witnessed every parting and every meeting, by which we sang, read, talked, danced, and made merry, the lamp that Hal asked for as soon as he beheld the glittering chandeliers of the new innovation, gas, the lamp that all agreed should go to me among other treasures, and be cased in glass to commemorate the old days, our old lamp has passed into the hands of strangers who neither know nor care for its history; and mother's bed, which, with the table and father's little ebony stand, alone remained uninjured, belongs now to a Yankee woman. Father prized his ebony table. He said he meant to have a gold plate placed in its centre, with an inscription, and I meant to have it done myself, when he died so soon after. A Yankee now sips his tea over it, just where some beau or beauty of the days of Charles II may have rested a laced sleeve or dimpled arm. Give the devil his due. Bless the Yankees for one thing, they say they tried hard to save our State House. End of Book 3, Part 11. End of Book 3. Book 4, Part 1 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 4, Part 1, January 15th to January 30th, 1863. From my sick bed, this 15th day of January, 1863. Linwood, Thursday. Am I not glad to get another blank book? On Sunday my old one gave out, to my unspeakable distress, and I would have been désolée if I had not had 3 or 4 letters to answer, as writing is my chief occupation during my tedious illness. Oh, that unfortunate trip to Port Hudson! Have I not cause to remember and regret it? 2 months since last Sunday since I have been lying here a cripple, and I am not yet able to take a step. However, on Monday, mother sent Dr. Woods as my 4th physician, and I have made up my mind that either he or nature will effect a cure before long. Wonder how it feels to walk? It makes me weary to see others try it. I always fear that the exertion must be very painful, an absurd idea which I endeavor to keep to myself. Monday, January 19th. That blessed Mr. Halsey, like an angel of mercy, sent me Kate Coventry yesterday, just when I was pining for a bonne bouche of some kind, I did not care what, whether a stick of candy or an equally palatable book. It is delightful to have one's wishes realized as soon as they are made. I think it rather caused me to relent towards Mr. Halsey. I did not feel half so belligerent as I did just the Sunday before. At all events, I felt well enough to go down in the evening when he called again, though I had been too indisposed to do so on a previous occasion. Oh, Sarah! Wheeled into the parlor, there I beheld not my friend alone, but several other individuals whose presence rather startled me. I found myself undergoing the terrors of an introduction to a Colonel Locke, and to my unspeakable surprise, Major Buckner was claiming the privilege of shaking hands with me, and Colonel Steadman was on the other side, and was that Mr. Halsey? Oh, never! The Mr. Halsey I knew was shockingly careless of his dress, never had his hair smooth, let his beard grow as it would, and wore a most ferocious slouched hat. This one had taken more than one look at the glass, a thing I should have imagined the other incapable of doing. He had bestowed the greatest care and attention on his dress, had brought his beard within reasonable limits, had combed his hair with the greatest precision, and held lightly in one hand an elegant little cap that I am sure must be provokingly becoming. Why, he was handsome! Ah, ça! Some mistake, surely, I cried to myself. My Mr. Halsey was not, certainly. If it be I, as I hope it may be, I've a little dog at home who will surely know me, I kept repeating. I resolved to test the little dog's sagacity, so I pretended to know this apparition, and thanked him for the pleasure he had afforded me by sending me Kate Coventry. He looked conscious and pleased. The little dog had found out his identity. I was more puzzled than ever. How account for this wondrous change? But metamorphosed John talked. He was expatiating at a most extraordinary rate, and had been doing so for an hour after supper, when Gibbes drew his chair near me Gibbes likes to hear what visitors say to his little sister whereupon timid Mr. Halsey drew his slightly back, and very soon after asked for his horse. Oh, Gibbes, you wretch! What an amusing tête à tête you spoiled, you innocent! And the General, of course, only waited for his exit before beginning to tease me unmercifully. I must put an end to this. They shall not bring such unjust charges against him. Yet how am I to make them see reason? Night. I am more pleased to night than I could well express. I have been talking to an old and dear friend, no other than Will Pinckney. His arrival was as unexpected as it was agreeable. The cry of "Here comes Will Pinckney" sent me back to August, '60, when the words were always the forerunner of fun and frolic. He told me what he called his secrets, of how he had been treated by the War Department, which has, indeed, behaved shockingly towards the Colonel. Thursday, 22nd January. What a rush of visitors last night! One would imagine they had all come by appointment expressly to have an impromptu dance, which they certainly enjoyed, by the way. There was little Captain C., the susceptible and simple, who so innocently says, "I seen" and "I done it," without the faintest suspicion of the peculiarity, and looks so sweet and guileless and amiable and soft that I can't help wondering if he would be sticky if I touch him. Indeed, I think his hands stick, at least; for when he told me good bye, it was with the greatest difficulty that I extracted mine from his grasp, he having forgotten to return it during a long farewell address; and even when I succeeded in recovering it by being almost rude, it was not released without a very sensible pressure from the "putty," or whatever it is that is so tenacious. I am afraid it is rather a habit of his, which has lost all force or meaning by being too frequently repeated. Then there was a horrid little wretch, vulgar and underbred, to my idea, to whom I was introduced as Mr. G. But here is Lieutenant Dupré, whom I have not yet introduced, though we have met before. Tall, good looking, a fine form, and not a sparkling face, I am inclined to believe that his chief merit lies in his legs. Certainly when he dances he puts his best foot forward, and knows it, too. Miriam, who adores dancing, is flirting openly with this divinity of the deux temps and polka, and skims around with his arm about her, position sanctified by the lively air Lydia is dashing off on the piano, with a grace and lightness only equaled by his own. And Lieutenant Duggan, with his good, honest, clever face, which so unmistakably proclaims him Tom, we know already, so no further description is needed. Captain Fenner, too, is well known, with his short though graceful figure, his good humored, intelligent face, irresistible imperial, and that roguish expression about that large mouth which displays such handsome teeth, and seems to say, "Don't trust me too far." Little Captain C tells me a long story about how Colonel Steadman had come to him and asked if he believed it possible that Miss Morgan had put her life and happiness in the hands of a homeopathic physician; how he considered her fate sealed, and what a shame it was to trifle with such a sad affair, at my age, too, ruined for life. It was dreadful, too sad. Hereupon, as continuing the story, he remarks that being asked his opinion by the Colonel, he agreed perfectly, and thought with him it was an appalling sacrifice, and oh, all sorts of things, anything just to make me miserable and unhappy. Well, what is written will come to pass. First comes a doctor with a butchering apparatus, who cups and bleeds me unmercifully, says I'll walk 10 days after, and exit. Enter another. Croton oil and strychnine pills, that'll set me up in 2 weeks, and exit. Enter a third. Sounds my bones, and pinches them from my head to my heels. Tells of the probability of a splinter of bone knocked off my left hip, the possibility of paralysis in the leg, the certainty of a seriously injured spine, and the necessity for the most violent counter irritants. Follow blisters, which sicken even disinterested people to look at, and a trifle of suffering which I come very near acknowledging to myself. Enter the fourth. Inhuman butchery! Wonder they did not kill you! Take 3 drops a day out of this tiny bottle, and presto! in 2 weeks you are walking. A fifth, in the character of a friend, says, "My dear young lady, if you do, your case is hopeless." What wonder that I am puzzled? A wiser head would be confused. I want to believe it all, but how is it possible? What will be, will be. Bon! Here comes a note from Mr. Halsey. Ah ça! Lend him Zaidie? Certainly. Here is a postscript 3 times the length of the note. Voyons. Will Miss Sarah make the annotations he requested in Kate Coventry? He is anxious to have the lady's opinion on the questions of taste and propriety which so frequently occur in the book. I'll not attempt such a display, yet there are several passages I am dying to mark. One in particular, speaking of the peculiarities of men, of how they are always more at ease when they have their hands employed, drawing confidence and conversation from a paper knife and book to tumble, a pair of scissors and a thread to snip, or even from imbibing the head of a cane, I am anxious to call his attention to. If I dared add to the list, or a cord and tassel to play with? This nervous Mr. Halsey is wearing out my pretty blue tassel that Frank admires so much. He says he can talk better when he dangles it. Think the hint might save it in the future. Friday night, January 23d. I am particularly happy to day, for we have just heard from Brother for the first time since last July; and he is well and happy, and wants us to come to him in New Orleans so he can take care of us, and no longer be so anxious for our safety. If we only could! To be sure, the letter is from a gentleman who is just out of the city, who says he writes at Brother's earnest request. Still, it is something to hear, even indirectly. $150 he encloses, with the request that mother will draw for any amount she wishes. Dear Brother, money is the least thing we need. First of all, we are dying for want of a home. If we could only see ours once more! During this time we have heard incidentally of Brother, of his having taken the oath of allegiance, which I am confident he did not do until Butler's October decree; of his being a prominent Union man; of his being a candidate for the Federal Congress, and of his withdrawal; and finally of his having gone to New York and Washington, from which places he only returned a few weeks since. That is all we ever heard. A very few people have been insolent enough to say to me, "Your brother is as good a Yankee as any." My blood boils as I answer, "Let him be President Lincoln if he will, and I would love him the same." And so I would. Politics cannot come between me and my father's son. What he thinks is right, for him, though not for me. If he is for the Union, it is because he believes it to be in the right, and I honor him for acting from conviction rather than from dread of public opinion. If he were to take up the sword against us to morrow, Miriam and I at least would say, "If he thinks it is his duty, he is right. We will not forget he is our father's child." And we will not. From that sad day when the sun was setting for the first time on our father's grave, when the great, strong man sobbed in agony at the thought of what we had lost, and taking us both on his lap, put his arms around us and said, "Dear little sisters, don't cry. I will be father and brother too, now." He has been both. He respects our opinions; we shall respect his. I confess myself a rebel, body and soul. Confess, I glory in it, am proud of being one, and would not forego the title for any other earthly one. Though none could regret the dismemberment of our old Union more than I did at the time, though I acknowledge that there never was a more unnecessary war than this in the beginning, yet once in earnest, from the secession of Louisiana, I date my change of sentiment. I have never since then looked back. Forward, forward, is the cry; and as the Federal States sink each day in more appalling folly and disgrace, I grow prouder still of my own country, and rejoice that we can no longer be confounded with a nation which shows so little fortitude in calamity, so little magnanimity in its hour of triumph. Yes, I am glad we are two distinct tribes. I am proud of my country, only wish I could fight in the ranks with our brave soldiers to prove my enthusiasm; would think death, mutilation, glorious in such a cause; cry, "War to all eternity before we submit!" But if I can't fight, being unfortunately a woman, which I now regret for the first time in my life, at least I can help in other ways. What fingers can do in knitting and sewing for them, I have done with the most intense delight. What words of encouragement and praise could accomplish, I have tried on more than one bold soldier boy. And not altogether in vain. I have lost my home and all its dear contents for our Southern rights; have stood on its deserted hearthstone and looked at the ruin of all I loved, without a murmur, almost glad of the sacrifice if it would contribute its mite towards the salvation of the Confederacy. And so it did, indirectly; for the battle of Baton Rouge, which made the Yankees, drunk with rage, commit outrages in our homes that civilized Indians would blush to perpetrate, forced them to abandon the town as untenable, whereby we were enabled to fortify Port Hudson here, which now defies their strength. True, they have reoccupied our town; that Yankees live in our house; but if our general said burn the whole concern, would I not put the torch to our home readily, though I love its bare skeleton still? Indeed I would, though I know what it is to be without one. Don't Lilly and mother live in a wretched cabin in vile Clinton, while strangers rest under our father's roof? Yankees, I owe you one for that. Well, I boast myself rebel, sing Dixie, shout Southern rights, pray for God's blessing on our cause, without ceasing, and would not live in this country if by any possible calamity we should be conquered. I am only a woman, and that is the way I feel. Brother may differ. What then? Shall I respect, love him less? No! God bless him! Union or Secession, he is always my dear, dear brother, and tortures could not make me change my opinion. Friday, January 30th. A whole week has passed since I opened this book, a week certainly not spent in idleness, if not a very interesting one; for I have kept my room almost all the time, leaving Miriam and Anna to entertain their guests alone. Even when Mr. Halsey called on Sunday, I declined going down. Why, I wonder? I felt better than usual, was in a splendid humor for talking, yet my excuses took my place, and I lay quietly in bed dreaming by the firelight and singing hymns to myself. Once in a while the thought would occur to me, "Why don't I go down?" But it was always answered with a wry face, and the hymn went on. Yet I knew he had come expecting to see me. On the table near me stood a bunch of snowdrops that Miriam had culled for her beloved Captain Bradford. An idea struck me so suddenly that my voice died instantly. The spirit of mischief had taken possession of me. Laughing to myself, I caught them up, drew 3 long, bright hairs from my head they looked right goldy in the firelight and tied them around the flowers. I thought I should never get to the end while wrapping them. Thus secured, a servant carried them into the parlor, with Miss Sarah's compliments to Mr. Halsey. Poor Miriam's cry of surprise at finding her flowers thus appropriated reached my ears and caused me to laugh again. It was rather cool. But then it was better fun than going down; and then didn't it flatter his vanity? O men, you vain creatures, a woman would receive a whole bunch of hair and 40,000 bouquets without having her head turned; while you well, I heard enough from Miriam to amuse me, at all events. And a day or two after, Captain Bradford had a long story to tell her, what he called a good joke on Mr. Halsey, of how he had found him kissing 3 long bright hairs in rapture, and on asking where he got them, received as an answer, "From the God blessedest little angel that ever wore long hair." This blessedest little angel did not intend it as a souvenir, and is consequently annoyed about stories of 3 hairs, intended as a string and nothing more, being wrapped in tissue paper and treasured up, so goes the tale, instead of being thrown into the fire as I certainly expected. Last night Anna and Miriam sat on my bed at twilight, playing cards while I tried my guitar, when Captain C , Major Spratley, and Lieutenant Dupré were announced. Quick, down went the cards as they sprang to their feet to throw off their neat calicoes. Where was Miriam's comb, and grenadine, and collar, and belt? Good gracious, where was her buckle? On the bureau, mantel, washstand, or under them? Please move a moment, Anna. In such a hurry, do. There was Anna. Wait, I'm in a hurry, too. Where is that pomatum? You, Malvina, if you don't help me, I'll There! Take that, miss! Now fly around! Malvina, with a faint, dingy pink suddenly brought out on her pale sea green face, did fly around, while I, hushing my guitar in the tumult, watch each running over the other, in silent amazement, wondering if order can come out of such confusion, and if the people downstairs were worth all that trouble. When I finally made my appearance in the parlor, it was with the conviction that I would have a dreadfully stupid time, and Captain C too. However, though at first I had both, soon only the last was left me. Some one suggested calling the spirits, which game I had imagined played out long ago, and we derived a great deal of amusement from it. 6 of us around a small table invoked them with the usual ceremony. There was certainly no trick played; every finger was above the board, and all feet sufficiently far from the single leg to insure fair play. Every rap seemed to come exactly from the centre of the table, and was painfully distinct, though not loud. When asked if there was a writing medium present, it indicated Captain C I observed that he seemed averse to trying it, but yielded at length and took the pencil in his hand. Our first question, of course, was, how long before peace? 9 months was written. Which foreign nation would recognize us first? France, then England, in 8 months. Who was Miriam to marry? Captain of a battery. Who? we all shouted. Captain C. E. Fenner was written again. When? In 10 months. I believe Captain C. to be honest about it. He seemed to have no control over his hand, and his arm trembled until it became exceedingly painful. Of course I do not actually believe in spiritualism, but there is certainly something in it one cannot understand, and Mrs. Badger's experience is enough to convert one alone. Each was startled in turn by extraordinary revelations concerning themselves. Gibbes was to be transferred to the Trans Mississippi Department, George would come home, and all the gentlemen had the name and address of future sweethearts written in full. The question was asked, "Who will Sarah Morgan fall in love with?" Every eye was on the pencil as a capital H was traced. As the A followed, I confessed to a decided disgust at the spirits, and was about to beg it might be discontinued, when the rest followed rapidly, until in 3 separate lines appeared, "Has not seen him yet." Here came an exclamation of surprise from Lydia and Miriam, who knew how true it was, and even Gibbes looked astonished. Captain in Virginia. Captain Charles Lewis. A perfect buzz of comments followed. Every one asked every one else if they knew any one by that name, and every one said no. Gibbes was decidedly more interested than I. That odd "has not seen him yet," expressing so exactly the fact that I pride myself upon, carried conviction in the truth of spirits almost. "Who will she marry?" asked Gibbes. He has a pet belief, in which I encourage him, that I will never marry. Again came the name as distinctly as before of Captain Charles Lewis. "When will she marry him?" In June, 1864, was the answer. I was to meet him in New Orleans. November followed, after a period. Of course the spirits produced some slight commotion which made the time pass pleasantly, until Miriam began to waltz with her Monsieur de Temps. Then Captain C. told me why he had been unwilling to try it; of how his father believed so strongly in it that he had very nearly been made crazy by it; and how he had sworn to abandon the practice of consulting them, seeing the effect produced. He did not believe in spirits himself, but could not account for the influence he was under when he saw his hand involuntarily write things he was totally unconscious of himself. However, he proposed that we two should have a private consultation with them, which I opened by asking when I should again see my home. I know he did not know anything about it, but on the paper appeared, "5 months have gone, 5 months more." It is just 5 months since I did see home. I think it was the 26th of August that Charlie took me there. He asked if he should ever marry. "Never. You will be jilted by the lady you love in Missouri, Miss Christina P." I pointed it out to him, as he happened to be looking at me when it was written. It surprised him into saying, "Why, I'm engaged to her." I asked whose spirit was communicating with us. He was watching the dance when his hand wrote, "John C." I laughed and asked if there was such a person, pointing to the name. He looked actually sick as he said, "Yes, my brother. He is dead." I had not the heart to talk of spirits again, so we took to writing poetry together, every alternate line falling to my lot. It made an odd jingle, the sentimental first line being turned to broad farce by my absurd second one. End of Book 4, Part 1. Part 2 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 4, Part 2, February 5th to March 14th, 1863. February 5th, Thursday night. A letter from Lavinia has come to me all the way from California. How happy it made me, though written so long ago, only the 30th of June. Lavinia has changed, changed. There is a sad, worn out tone in every line. It sounds old, as though she had lived years and years ago, and was writing as though she were dead and buried long since. Lavinia, whose letters used to keep me in sunshine for weeks at a time! Well, no wonder she is sad, all these dreary years from home, with so faint a hope of ever again seeing it, and all these sorrows and troubles that have befallen us combined are not calculated to make her happy. But I wish she had kept her cheerful heart. Well, perhaps it is easier for us to be cheerful and happy, knowing the full extent of our calamities, than it is for her, knowing so little and having just cause to fear so much. Courage! Better days are coming, and then I'll have many a funny tale to tell her of the days when the Yankees kept us on the qui vive, or made us run for our lives. It will tell merrily, be almost as lively as those running days were. One of my chief regrets over my helplessness is that I will not be able to run in the next stampede. I used to enjoy it. Oh, the days gone by, the dreary days, when, cut off from our own people and surrounded by Yankees, we used to catch up any crumb of news favorable to our side that was smuggled into town, and the Brunos and I would write each other little dispatches of consolation and send them by little negroes. Those were dismal days. Yet how my spirits would rise when the long roll would beat and we would prepare for flight! Monday, February 9th, 1863. Night. A letter from my dear little Jimmy! How glad I am, words could not express. This is the first since he arrived in England, and now we know what has become of him at last. While awaiting the completion of the ironclad gunboat to which he has been appointed, like a trump he has put himself to school, and studies hard, which is evident from the great improvement he already exhibits in his letter. My delight at hearing from Jimmy is overcast by the bad news Lilly sends of mother's health. I have been unhappy about her for a long while. Her health has been wretched for 3 months; so bad that during all my long illness she has never been with me after the 3rd day. I was never separated from mother for so long before, and I am homesick and heartsick about her. Only 20 miles apart, and she with a shocking bone felon in her hand and that dreadful cough, unable to come to me, whilst I am lying helpless here, as unable to get to her. I feel right desperate about it. This evening Lilly writes of her having chills and fevers, and looking very, very badly. So Miriam started off instantly to see her. My poor mother! She will die if she stays in Clinton, I know she will. Wednesday, February 18th. Gibbes has gone back to his regiment. I can't say how dreary I felt when he came to tell me good bye. I did not mean to cry, but how could I help it when he put his arms around me? Sunday, February 22nd, 1863. Mother has come to me. Oh, how glad I was to see her this morning! And the Georgia project, which I dared not speak of for fear it should be mere talk and nothing more, is a reality. Yes, we are actually going! I can hardly believe that such good fortune as getting out of that wretched Clinton really awaits us. Perhaps I shall not like Augusta, either. A stranger in a strange city is not usually enchanted with everything one beholds. But still, a change of scene, a new country, new people, it is worth while. Shall we really go? Will some page in this book actually record Augusta, Georgia? No, I dare not believe it; yet the mere thought has given me strength within the last 2 weeks to attempt to walk. Learning to walk at my age! Is it not amusing? But the smallest baby knows more about it than I did at first. Of course I knew one foot was to be put before the other, but the question was, how it was to be done when they would not go. I have conquered that difficulty, however, and can now walk almost 2 yards, if some one holds me fast. Sunset. Will Pinckney has this instant left. Ever since dinner he has been vehemently opposing the Georgia move, insisting that it will cost me my life by rendering me a confirmed cripple. He says he could take care of me, but no one else can, so I must not be moved. I am afraid his arguments have about shaken mother's resolution. Pshaw! It will do me good. I must go. It will not do to remain here. 27,000 Yankees are preparing to march on Port Hudson, and this place will certainly be either occupied by them or burned. To go to Clinton is to throw myself in their hands; so why not one grand move to Augusta? Monday, February 23d. Here goes! News has been received that the Yankees are already packed, ready to march against us at any hour. If I was up and well, how my heart would swell with exultation! As it is, it throbs so with excitement that I can scarcely lie still. Hope amounts almost to presumption at Port Hudson. They are confident that our 15,000 can repulse twice the number. Great God! I say it with all reverence, if we could defeat them! If we could scatter, capture, annihilate them! My heart beats but one prayer, victory! I shall grow wild repeating it. In the meantime, though, Linwood is in danger. This dear place, my second home, its loved inhabitants, think of their being in such peril! Oh, I shall cry heartily if harm comes to them. But I must leave before. No use of leaving my bones for the Yankees to pick. Better sing Dixie in Georgia. To morrow, consequently, I go to that earthly paradise, Clinton, thence to be reshipped (so goes the present programme) to Augusta in 3 days. And no time for adieux. Wonder who will be surprised, who vexed, and who will cry over the unforeseen separation. Not a single good bye, nothing, except an old brass button that Mr. Halsey gave me as a souvenir in case he should be killed in the coming assault. It is too bad. Ah, Destiny, Destiny, where do you take us? During these 2 trying years, I have learned to feel myself a mere puppet in the hands of a something that takes me here to day, to morrow there, always unexpectedly, and generally very unwillingly, but at last leads me somewhere or other, right side up with care, after 1,000 troubles and distresses. The hand of Destiny is on me now. Where will it lead me? Tuesday, February 24th. Meeting Miriam by mere accident on the road last evening, and hearing of our surprising journey to Georgia, Mr. Halsey came to spend a last evening with us and say good bye. What a deluge of regrets, hopes, fears, etc.! Perfectly overwhelming! Why had I not told him of it the night before? All our friends would be so disappointed at not having an opportunity of saying good bye. If the Yankees would only postpone their attack so he might accompany us! But no matter, he would come on in 2 months and meet us there. And would we not write to him? Thank you, Miriam may, but I shall hardly do so. We had such a pleasant evening together, talking over our trip. Then we had a dozen songs on the guitar, gay, sad, and sentimental. Then he gave me a sprig of jessamine as a keepsake, and I ripped open my celebrated running bag to get a real, for true, silver 5 cents, a perfect curiosity in these days, which I gave him in exchange, and which he promised to wear on his watch chain. He and Miriam amused themselves examining the contents of my sack and laughing at my treasures, the wretches. Then came good bye. I think he was sorry to see us go. Well, he ought to miss us. Ah, these farewells! To day I bid adieu to Linwood. It may be for years, and it may be forever. This good bye will cost me a sigh. Wednesday, February 25th. Here we are still, in spite of our expectations. Difficulty on difficulty arose, and an hour before the cars came, it was settled that mother should go to Clinton and make the necessary arrangements, and leave us to follow in a day or two. 2 days more! Miriam no more objected than I did, so mother went alone. Poor Miriam went to bed soon after, very ill; so ill that she lay groaning in bed at dusk, when a stir was heard in the hall below, and Colonel Steadman, Major Spratley, and Mr. Dupré were announced. Presto! Up she sprang, and flew about in the most frantic style, emptying the trunk on the floor to get her prettiest dress, and acting as though she had never heard of pains and groans. When we leave, how much I shall miss the fun of seeing her and Anna running over each other in their excitement of dressing for their favorites! Anna's first exclamation was, "Ain't you glad she didn't go?" And certainly we were not sorry, from mere compassion, for what would she have done with all three? If I laughed at their extra touches to their dresses, it did not prevent me from bestowing unusual attention on my own. And by way of bravado, when I was carried down, I insisted on Mrs. Badger lending me her arm to let me walk into the parlor, and prove to Colonel Steadman that in spite of his prophecies, I was able to take a few steps at least. His last words, "You won't go, will you? Think once more," sent me upstairs wondering, thinking, undecided and unsatisfied, hardly knowing what to do or what to say. Every time I tried to sleep, those calm, deep, honest gray eyes started up before my closed ones, and that earnest, "You won't go, will you? Think once more," rang in my ears like a solemn warning. Hopes of seeing Georgia grew rather faint that night. Is it lawful to risk my life? But is it not better to lose it while believing that I have still a chance of saving it by going, than to await certain death calmly and unresisting in Clinton? I'd rather die struggling for this life, this beautiful, loved, blessed life that God has given me. March 10th, Tuesday. I had so many nice things to say, which now, alas, are knocked forever from my head, when news came that the Yankees were advancing on us, and were already within 15 miles. The panic which followed reminded me forcibly of our running days in Baton Rouge. Each one rapidly threw into trunks all clothing worth saving, with silver and valuables, to send to the upper plantation. I sprang up, determined to leave instantly for Clinton so mother would not be alarmed for our safety, but before I got halfway dressed, Helen Carter came in and insisted on my remaining, declaring that my sickness and inability to move would prove a protection to the house, and save it from being burned over their heads. Put on that plea, though I have no faith in melting the bowels of compassion of a Yankee myself, I consented to remain, as Miriam urgently represented the dangers awaiting Clinton. So she tossed all we owned into our trunk to send to mother as hostage of our return, and it is now awaiting the cars. My earthly possessions are all reposing by me on the bed at this instant, consisting of my guitar, a change of clothes, running bag, cabas, and this book. For in spite of their entreaties, I would not send it to Clinton, expecting those already there to meet with a fiery death, though I would like to preserve those of the most exciting year of my life. They tell me that this will be read aloud to me to torment me, but I am determined to burn it if there is any danger of that. Why, I would die without some means of expressing my feelings in the stirring hours so rapidly approaching. I shall keep it by me. Such bustle and confusion! Every one hurried, anxious, excited, whispering, packing trunks, sending them off; wondering negroes looking on in amazement until ordered to mount the carts waiting at the door, which are to carry them too away. How disappointed the Yankees will be at finding only white girls instead of their dear sisters and brothers whom they love so tenderly! Sorry for their disappointment. They say they are advancing in overwhelming numbers. That is nothing so long as God helps us, and from our very souls we pray His blessing on us in this our hour of need. For myself, I cannot yet fully believe they are coming. It would be a relief to have it over. I have taken the responsibility of Lydia's jewelry on my shoulders, and hope to be able to save it in the rush which will take place. Down at the cars, Miriam met Frank Enders, going to Clinton in charge of a car full of Yankees, deserters who came into our lines. He thinks, just as I do, that our trunks are safer here than there. Now that they are all off, we all agree that it was the most foolish thing we could have done. These Yankees interfere with all our arrangements. I am almost ashamed to confess what an absurdly selfish thought occurred to me a while ago. I was lamenting to myself all the troubles that surround us, the dangers and difficulties that perplex us, thinking of the probable fate that might befall some of our brave friends and defenders in Port Hudson, when I thought, too, of the fun we would miss. Horrid, was it not? But worse than that, I was longing for something to read, when I remembered Frank told me he had sent to Alexandria for Bulwer's "Strange Story" for me, and then I unconsciously said, "How I wish it would get here before the Yankees!" I am very anxious to read it, but confess I am ashamed of having thought of it at such a crisis. So I toss up the farthing Frank gave me for a keepsake the other day, and say I'll try in future to think less of my own comfort and pleasure. Poor Mr. Halsey! What a sad fate the pets he procures for me meet! He stopped here just now, on his way somewhere, and sent me a curious bundle with a strange story by Miriam. It seems he got a little flying squirrel for me to play with, must know my partiality for pets, and last night, while attempting to tame him, the little creature bit his finger, whereupon he naturally let him fall on the ground. Temper! Which put a period to his existence. He had the nerve to skin him after the foul murder, and sent all that remains of him out to me to prove his original intention. The softest, longest, prettiest fur, and such a duck of a tail! Poor little animal couldn't have been larger than my fist. Wonder if its spirit will meet with that of the little bird which flew heavenward with all that pink ribbon and my letter from Mr. Halsey. Saturday, March 14th, 5:00 P.M. They are coming! The Yankees are coming at last! For 4 or 5 hours the sound of their cannon has assailed our ears. There! That one shook my bed. Oh, they are coming! God grant us the victory! They are now within 4 miles of us on the big road to Baton Rouge. On the road from town to Clinton we have been fighting since daylight at Redbridge, and have been repulsed. 15 gunboats have passed Vicksburg, they say. It will be an awful fight. No matter, with God's help we'll conquer yet. Again! The report comes nearer. Oh, they are coming! Coming to defeat, I pray God. Only we 7 women remain in the house. The General left this morning to our unspeakable relief. They would hang him, we fear, if they should find him here. Mass' Jean has gone to his company. We are left alone here to meet them. If they will burn the house, they will have to burn me in it, for I cannot walk, and I know they shall not carry me. I'm resigned. If I should burn, I have friends and brothers enough to avenge me. Create such a consternation! Better than being thrown from a buggy, only I'd not survive to hear of it. Letter from Lilly to day has distressed me beyond measure. Starvation which threatened them seems actually at their door. With more money than they could use in ordinary times, they can find nothing to purchase, not a scrap of meat in the house for a week, no pork, no potatoes, fresh meat obtained once as a favor, and poultry and flour articles unheard of. Besides that, Tish crippled and Margaret very ill, while Liddy has run off to the Yankees. Heaven only knows what will become of them. The other day we were getting ready to go to them, Thursday, when the General disapproved of my running such a risk, saying he'd call it a d piece of nonsense if I asked what he thought. So we remained. They will certainly starve soon enough without our help, and yet I feel we should all be together still. That last superfluous word is the refrain of Gibbes's song that is ringing in my ears, and that I am chanting in a kind of ecstasy of excitement. Then let the cannon boom as it will, we'll be gay and happy still. And we will be happy in spite of Yankee guns. Only, my dear This, That, and the Other at Port Hudson, how I pray for your safety! God spare our brave soldiers, and lead them to victory! I write, touch my guitar, talk, pick lint, and pray so rapidly that it is hard to say which is my occupation. I sent Frank some lint the other day, and a bundle of it for Mr. Halsey is by me. Hope neither will need it. But to my work again. 1:30 A.M. It has come at last! What an awful sound! I thought I had heard a bombardment before, but Baton Rouge was child's play compared to this. At 11:30 came the first gun, at least the first I heard, and I hardly think it could have commenced many moments before. Instantly I had my hand on Miriam, and at my first exclamation, Mrs. Badger and Anna answered. All three sprang to their feet to dress, while all four of us prayed aloud. Such an incessant roar! And at every report the house shaking so, and we thinking of our dear soldiers, the dead and dying, and crying aloud for God's blessing on them, and defeat and overthrow to their enemies. That dreadful roar! I can't think fast enough. They are too quick to be counted. We have all been in Mrs. Carter's room, from the last window of which we can see the incessant flash of the guns, and the great shooting stars of flame, which must be the hot shot of the enemy. There is a burning house in the distance, the second one we have seen to night; for Yankees can't prosper unless they are pillaging honest people. Already they have stripped all on their road of cattle, mules, and negroes. Gathered in a knot within and without the window, we 6 women up here watched in the faint starlight the flashes from the guns, and silently wondered which of our friends were lying stiff and dead; and then, shuddering at the thought, betook ourselves to silent prayer. I think we know what it is to wrestle with God in prayer. We had but one thought. Yet for women we took it almost too coolly. No tears, no cries, no fear, though for the first 5 minutes everybody's teeth chattered violently. Mrs. Carter had her husband in Fenner's battery, the hottest place if they are attacked by the land force, and yet to my unspeakable relief she betrayed no more emotion than we who had only friends there. We know absolutely nothing. When does one ever know anything in the country? But we presume that this is an engagement between our batteries and the gunboats attempting to run the blockade. Firing has slackened considerably. All are to lie down already dressed; but being in my nightgown from necessity, I shall go to sleep, though we may expect at any instant to hear the tramp of Yankee cavalry in the yard. End of Book 4, Part 2.